The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace, as thousands of tourists gathered for the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Marcus Thompson, a 28-year-old businessman from Chicago who had saved for 2 years to make this dream trip to London. His expensive camera hung around his neck, and his designer sneakers squeaked against the wet pavement from the previous night's rain. Marcus had arrived early, determined to get the perfect shot for his social media accounts. He pushed through the crowd with little regard for the elderly couple he bumped into, or the family with small children he stepped in front of. His focus was entirely on one thing: going viral. He had seen countless videos online of tourists interacting with the stoic royal guards, and he was convinced he could create something even more spectacular. The royal guards stood motionless at their posts, their red tunics immaculate and their black bearskin hats towering above their heads. These weren't actors or performers. They were highly trained soldiers from elite regiments responsible for protecting the monarchy and upholding centuries of tradition. Each guard had undergone rigorous training, both military and ceremonial, and took their duties with the utmost seriousness. Marcus studied the guards with calculating eyes, noting how they remained perfectly still despite the chaos of tourists around them. He had read online that the guards were not supposed to react to anything, that they were like living statues. This information, combined with his desire for internet fame, began forming a dangerous plan in his mind. He pulled out his phone, switched it to video mode, and started recording himself. "What's up, everyone? Marcus here, and I'm about to show you something absolutely insane," he whispered into his camera, grinning widely. "I'm standing right here at Buckingham Palace, and I'm going to test just how serious these guards really are. This is going to be epic." The crowd around him was mostly families and respectful tourists, taking photos from appropriate distances and marveling at the ceremony with genuine appreciation. Children pointed in wonder at the guards' tall hats, while their parents explained the historical significance of the tradition. Tour guides spoke in hushed, respectful tones about the honor and dedication required to serve as a Queen's Guard. But Marcus was oblivious to the reverent atmosphere surrounding him. His mind was focused solely on creating content that would generate likes, shares, and followers. He had no understanding of the deep respect these guards commanded or the serious nature of their role. To him, they were simply props in his personal show, objects to be used for his entertainment and potential profit. As he moved closer to one of the guard posts, other tourists began to notice his unusual behavior. Some shook their heads disapprovingly, while others moved their children away from what they sensed might become an uncomfortable situation. A few pulled out their own phones, perhaps sensing that something noteworthy was about to happen, though they had no idea just how serious the consequences would be. The guard Marcus had chosen stood at the right side of the palace entrance, his rifle held at the present arms position. His name was Guardsman James Mitchell, a decorated soldier with 8 years of service and 3 tours of duty. Behind his stoic exterior was a man who took immense pride in his role and had zero tolerance for disrespect toward the institution he served. Marcus approached slowly, his phone held high, narrating his actions as if he were the star of his own reality show. The distance between him and the guard grew shorter with each step, and the tension in the air became palpable to those watching. What Marcus didn't realize was that he was about to learn a very painful lesson about respect, tradition, and the serious consequences of treating sacred institutions as personal playgrounds. Marcus continued his approach toward Guardsman Mitchell, completely unaware of the gravity of what he was about to do. His social media followers had been demanding more extreme content lately, and his last few posts had received disappointing engagement numbers. The pressure to create something extraordinary had been building for months, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to deliver something truly spectacular. "Okay, guys, I'm getting closer now," Marcus whispered into his phone, barely containing his excitement. "Look at this guy, he's like a statue. I bet I can get right up to him and he won't even blink. This is going to break the internet." His voice carried further than he intended, and several nearby tourists turned to stare at him with growing concern. The royal guard maintained his position with absolute precision, but his trained eyes had already noted Marcus's approach. Years of experience had taught Guardsman Mitchell to identify potential threats or troublemakers long before they became a problem. He could sense the young American's intentions through his body language and the way he held his phone. This wasn't someone taking respectful photos from a distance. This was someone looking for trouble. Marcus pulled out a small bag of trail mix from his pocket, an idea forming in his head that he thought was incredibly clever. He had seen a video once where someone tried to feed a royal guard like they were feeding birds in a park. The memory made him chuckle, and he was certain he could create something even more outrageous. His followers loved when he pushed boundaries, and this would definitely push some boundaries. The crowd around the palace entrance had grown larger as the changing of the guard ceremony approached. Families from around the world stood with their children, many of whom were experiencing this famous British tradition for the first time. The atmosphere should have been one of wonder and respect. But Marcus's behavior was beginning to create an uncomfortable tension that rippled through the nearby spectators. An elderly British gentleman named Harold Pemberton, who had served in the military himself 40 years earlier, watched Marcus with increasing disapproval. He had brought his grandson to see the guards as a way to teach the boy about service, honor, and tradition. Now he found himself witnessing behavior that went against everything these values represented. "Margaret," Harold whispered to his wife, "that young man is going to cause trouble. Should we alert someone?" His wife squeezed his arm nervously, equally disturbed by what they were witnessing but unsure of what they could do to intervene. Marcus was now just 15 feet away from Guardsman Mitchell, close enough that his voice no longer needed to be a whisper for his phone's microphone to pick up his commentary. "All right, everyone, this is it. I'm about to make history here at Buckingham Palace. Make sure you're recording this. You'll want to tell your friends you saw it happen live." The guard's peripheral vision caught every movement Marcus made, but his training required him to maintain his position unless directly threatened or unless someone crossed clearly defined boundaries. Marcus hadn't quite reached that point yet, but he was dancing dangerously close to the line that separated inappropriate behavior from actions that would trigger an immediate response. Other tourists began pulling out their phones, some hoping to capture what they sensed might become a viral moment, others hoping to document what could potentially be evidence if the situation escalated. The energy around the palace entrance had shifted from peaceful observation to anxious anticipation. Marcus took another step forward, now close enough that he could see the individual threads in the guard's red tunic, the ornate details of the uniform, the precise positioning of every button and badge, the immaculate condition of the equipment. All of it spoke to a level of professionalism and dedication that completely escaped Marcus's understanding. "Look at all these details," Marcus said into his camera, zooming in on the guard's uniform. "This costume is incredible. I wonder how much they pay these actors to stand here all day pretending to be soldiers." His words carried clearly through the relatively quiet morning air, and several British tourists within earshot exchanged shocked glances at his casual disrespect. What Marcus failed to understand was that he wasn't looking at an actor in a costume. He was approaching a highly trained soldier who had earned his position through rigorous testing, dedication, and service to his country. The costume was a uniform worn with pride by men who had served in combat zones around the world, who had earned the right to stand guard at one of the most important buildings in the United Kingdom. As Marcus prepared to take his final steps toward what he believed would be internet fame, he remained completely oblivious to the fact that he was about to learn a harsh lesson about the difference between entertainment and reality. Marcus took his final steps toward Guardsman Mitchell, crossing into the invisible boundary that separated respectful observation from direct interference with a royal guard's duties. His phone was held high, capturing every moment as he prepared to execute what he believed would be his most viral stunt yet. The trail mix rattled in his other hand as he shook the bag near the guard's face. "Come on, buddy, want some snacks?" Marcus said loudly, his voice dripping with condescension. "I know you must get hungry standing here all day doing nothing." He waved the bag of nuts and dried fruit directly in front of Guardsman Mitchell's face, coming within inches of actually touching the guard's nose with the plastic packaging. The crowd around them had gone nearly silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Children stopped chattering, adults held their breath, and even the usual sounds of camera clicks seemed to pause. The only sound was Marcus's continued commentary as he narrated his actions for his phone's camera. "This is unbelievable, guys. Look how committed he is to this act. I'm literally right in his face and he's not even blinking." Marcus laughed as he moved the bag closer to the guard's mouth. "Maybe I should try feeding him like a baby bird. What do you think? Should I put some nuts right in his mouth?" Guardsman Mitchell had endured enough, What had started as inappropriate behavior had escalated to direct interference with his duties and personal space. The moment Marcus moved to actually place food near his mouth, several protocols were activated simultaneously. This was no longer a tourist taking inappropriate photos. This was someone actively disrupting a royal guard's duty and treating him with deliberate disrespect. Without warning, Guardsman Mitchell's right foot came down hard on the cobblestones as he executed a perfect stamping movement that echoed like a gunshot across the palace courtyard. The sound was so sharp and unexpected that Marcus jumped backward, nearly dropping both his phone and the bag of trail mix. His face went from smug confidence to startled shock in an instant. "Make way for the Queen's Guard." Mitchell's voice boomed across the courtyard with the full power of his military training. The shout was so loud and commanding that it seemed to make the very stones of the palace vibrate. Marcus had never heard a human voice carry such authority and barely contained fury. The trail mix scattered across the cobblestones as Marcus stumbled backward, his carefully planned stunt completely forgotten in the face of the guard's thunderous response. His phone, which had been steady throughout his approach, now shook in his trembling hands as he tried to process what had just happened. The crowd of tourists around them erupted into a mixture of gasps, nervous laughter, and scattered applause. Some visitors clearly approved of the guard's response, while others seemed shocked by the sudden transformation from silent statue to commanding soldier. Children clung to their parents, some crying from the unexpected loud noise, while adults tried to process the dramatic shift in atmosphere. Harold Pemberton, the elderly British gentleman who had been watching with disapproval, felt a surge of satisfaction. "Serves him right," he muttered to his wife. "About time someone taught that young fool some respect." His grandson looked up at him with wide eyes, beginning to understand that the guards weren't just decorations but real soldiers with real authority. Marcus continued backing away, his face flushed with embarrassment and confusion. The confidence he had displayed moments before had evaporated completely, replaced by a growing realization that he might have made a serious mistake. His followers had wanted extreme content, but this felt far more intense than anything he had anticipated. I was just... Marcus stammered, trying to speak to the guard, but Guardsman Mitchell had returned to his position of attention, his eyes fixed straight ahead as if Marcus no longer existed. The guard's message had been delivered clearly and effectively. The interaction was over, and any further interference would likely result in even more serious consequences. The scattered trail mix crunched under the feet of tourists, who were now giving Marcus and the guard a much wider berth. Security personnel stationed around the palace had taken note of the incident, and Marcus could see them speaking into their radios while keeping their eyes fixed on him. What had started as a plan for internet fame was quickly turning into something far more serious than Marcus had ever imagined. The laughter and excitement he had felt moments before were replaced by a growing sense that he might be in real trouble. The guard's response had been swift, professional, and completely within his authority. But it was also just the beginning of the consequences Marcus would face for his disrespectful behavior. As tourists continued to stare and whisper among themselves, Marcus realized that his phone was still recording. The video that was supposed to make him famous was certainly capturing everything, but perhaps not in the way he had originally intended. Within seconds of Guardsman Mitchell's thunderous command, 3 palace security officers appeared as if from nowhere, moving with practiced efficiency toward Marcus. Their approach was calm but unmistakably purposeful, and Marcus suddenly understood that his problems were far from over. The lead officer, Sergeant Patricia Williams, had 20 years of experience dealing with difficult tourists and could assess situations like this with a single glance. "Sir, I need you to step this way, please," Sergeant Williams said firmly, her voice carrying the same authority as the guard's shout, but delivered with professional calm. She positioned herself between Marcus and Guardsman Mitchell, while her 2 colleagues flanked Marcus on either side. There was no aggression in their movements, but their message was crystal clear. Cooperation was not optional. Marcus looked around desperately, suddenly aware that dozens of tourists were filming him with their phones. The attention he had craved was now focused entirely on him, but not in the way he had imagined. Instead of admiring his boldness, the faces around him showed a mixture of disapproval, curiosity, and second-hand embarrassment. "Look, I wasn't doing anything wrong," Marcus protested, his voice cracking slightly. "I was just having some fun with the guard." It's not like I hurt anyone. He held up his phone as if the video footage would somehow vindicate his behavior, not realizing that it would more likely serve as evidence against him. Sergeant Williams examined the scattered trail mix on the ground and noted the proximity to Guardsman Mitchell's position. Years of experience had taught her to assess situations quickly, and everything she observed supported the guard's decision to intervene. The evidence painted a clear picture of deliberate harassment and disrespect. "Sir, you interfered with a royal guard in the execution of his duties, which is a serious offense," Williams explained patiently. "You'll need to accompany us for questioning, and we'll need to review any recordings you may have made." Her tone remained professional, but Marcus could detect the steel underneath her polite words. The crowd of tourists had formed a loose circle around the scene, maintaining a respectful distance while clearly fascinated by the unfolding drama. Some visitors whispered translations to family members who didn't speak English, while others shook their heads in disapproval at Marcus's behavior. A group of American tourists looked particularly embarrassed, clearly feeling that Marcus was representing their country poorly. Marcus's phone, still clutched in his trembling hand, had captured everything from his confident approach to his current predicament. The video that was supposed to showcase his cleverness instead documented his progressive humiliation and the professional response of the palace security team. "This is insane," Marcus exclaimed, his panic beginning to override his judgment. "I'm an American citizen. You can't arrest me for talking to a guard." His voice rose in pitch as the reality of his situation began to sink in. The fantasy of internet fame was rapidly being replaced by the nightmare of potential legal consequences. Sergeant Williams remained unimpressed by his nationality or his protests. "Sir, nationality doesn't grant you permission to harass our personnel or disrupt official ceremonies. The law applies equally to all visitors, regardless of where they're from." Her words carried the weight of someone who had dealt with similar claims countless times before. One of the flanking officers, Constable David Chen, stepped forward to address the growing crowd of onlookers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please continue enjoying your visit to the palace. This situation is being handled appropriately, and there's nothing more to see here." His calm professionalism helped disperse some of the gathered tourists, though many continued to watch from a distance. Marcus looked around frantically, hoping to spot a sympathetic face in the crowd, or perhaps someone with authority who might intervene on his behalf. Instead, he saw only disapproving stares and the continued recording of his humiliation. Even fellow Americans in the crowd seemed to be distancing themselves from him, clearly embarrassed by his behavior. The elderly British gentleman, Harold Pemberton, approached Sergeant Williams with his military bearing still evident despite his age. "Officer, I witnessed the entire incident," he said formally. "That young man deliberately harassed the guardsmen and showed complete disrespect for your traditions. I'd be happy to provide a statement if needed." Sergeant Williams nodded gratefully. "Thank you, sir. We may indeed need witness statements." She turned back to Marcus, whose face had gone pale as he realized that multiple people were willing to testify against him. As the security team prepared to escort Marcus away from the scene, Guardsman Mitchell remained at his post, having returned to his position of perfect attention. To the casual observer, it might appear that nothing had happened at all, but every nearby tourist now understood that beneath the ceremonial uniform was a professional soldier who would not tolerate disrespect. Marcus's phone continued recording as he was led away, documenting his transformation from confident prankster to confused and frightened young man facing the serious consequences of his actions. The viral fame he had sought was indeed within his grasp, but for all the wrong reasons. The palace security office was a stark contrast to the ornate grandeur that tourists usually associated with Buckingham Palace. Marcus found himself in a simple professional room with white walls, fluorescent lighting, and basic furniture that could have belonged to any government building. The reality of his situation was becoming increasingly clear as he sat across from Sergeant Williams and Detective Inspector Robert Hayes, who had been called in to handle what was now being treated as a potential criminal matter. "Let's start from the beginning," Mr. Thompson, Detective Inspector Hayes said, consulting a notepad where he had already recorded basic information from Marcus's identification. "Can you explain what you were doing when you approached Guardsman Mitchell this morning?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. His phone had been confiscated as potential evidence, leaving him feeling disconnected and vulnerable. I was just making a video for my social media accounts, he said quietly. I thought it would be funny to see if I could get a reaction from the guard. I didn't think it was illegal. Sergeant Williams leaned forward slightly. Mr. Thompson, did you research the laws regarding interference with royal guards before planning your video? Her question was pointed, and Marcus realized that his ignorance of the law wouldn't serve as an adequate defense. No, I've seen videos online of people taking pictures with the guards, and I thought this would be similar. Marcus admitted, I didn't know there were specific laws about it. His voice trailed off as he recognized how weak his explanation sounded. Detective Inspector Hayes made notes as Marcus spoke, his expression remaining neutral but professional. I understand you're from Chicago, Mr. Thompson. Have you ever interfered with police officers or security personnel in the United States while filming content for social media? The question caught Marcus off guard. No, of course not. That would be crazy, he replied without thinking, then immediately realized the implication of his words. If he understood that interfering with law enforcement in America was unacceptable, why had he thought it would be different in England? So you do understand the concept of respecting uniformed personnel in the execution of their duties? Sergeant Williams asked, her tone suggesting she had caught the contradiction in his reasoning. Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks. I guess I just didn't think of the guards the same way. I mean, they're mostly ceremonial, right? They're not really like regular police or military. His explanation sounded weak even to his own ears, and he could see from the officer's expressions that he was only making things worse. Detective Inspector Hayes consulted another document on his desk. Mr. Thompson, the Royal Guards are active military personnel from elite regiments. Guardsman Mitchell, whom you harassed this morning, has served 3 combat tours and has been decorated for valor. These men are not actors or performers. They are professional soldiers carrying out official duties. The weight of this information hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had spent weeks planning his trip, researching tourist attractions and photo opportunities, but had never bothered to learn about the actual role and background of the people he intended to use as props for his entertainment. I really didn't know that, Marcus said honestly. The videos I saw online made it seem like they were just part of the tourist experience, like street performers or something. His voice was barely above a whisper as the full extent of his misunderstanding became clear. Sergeant Williams pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus the video footage that had been captured by the palace's security cameras. The high-definition recording showed his entire approach, his dismissive comments, and his attempt to feed the guard like an animal. Watching his behavior from an objective perspective was deeply uncomfortable. Mr. Thompson, you can clearly see here that you invaded Guardsman Mitchell's personal space, attempted to place food near his mouth, and made several derogatory comments about his service, Williams explained. This behavior constitutes harassment at minimum and potentially assault depending on how we choose to proceed. Marcus stared at the screen in horror. The person in the video looked like a stranger, someone arrogant, disrespectful, and completely oblivious to the significance of what they were doing. I wasn't trying to be cruel or anything. I was just trying to create entertaining content. Detective Inspector Hayes closed his notepad and looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Thompson, intent doesn't always determine consequences. Your actions disrupted an official ceremony, disrespected a decorated soldier, and potentially violated several laws. The fact that you were seeking entertainment doesn't minimize the impact of your behavior. The room fell silent as Marcus processed the gravity of his situation. What had started as a quest for social media fame had become a potential criminal matter that could affect his ability to travel, his reputation, and possibly even his career back home in Chicago. What happens now? Marcus asked quietly, his voice small and uncertain. That depends on several factors, Sergeant Williams replied. We'll need to review all available evidence, speak with witnesses, and determine whether to pursue formal charges. You may also face civil penalties for disrupting official palace operations. As Marcus sat in the sterile security office, surrounded by the consequences of his thoughtless actions, he began to understand that some mistakes cannot be undone with a simple apology or deletion of a video. The lesson he was learning about respect, tradition, and personal responsibility was far more expensive than anything he had ever imagined. 3 hours after his arrest, Marcus found himself facing consequences he had never imagined possible. Detective Inspector Hayes returned to the interview room with a thick folder containing witness statements, security footage, and legal documents that would determine his immediate future. The casual morning that was supposed to produce entertaining social media content had transformed into a legal nightmare with far-reaching implications. "Mr. Thompson, we've completed our preliminary investigation," Hayes announced as he settled into his chair. "We have statements from 12 witnesses, including several who recorded your behavior on their personal devices. Additionally, we've discovered that you've posted similar content from other locations during your visit to London." Marcus's stomach dropped. He had indeed filmed himself behaving inappropriately at other tourist destinations, though nothing as extreme as his actions at the palace. "Those other videos weren't illegal," he said defensively. "I was just having fun." Sergeant Williams consulted her own set of documents. "Mr. Thompson, we found footage of you climbing on a war memorial yesterday, which is actually a criminal offense. There's also video of you disrupting a street musician's performance and taking his hat without permission. This suggests a pattern of disrespectful behavior, rather than a single poor decision." The revelation that his other activities were being scrutinized sent waves of panic through Marcus. What he had considered harmless content creation was being reframed as a series of offenses against British law and social norms. Each video he had proudly posted was now potential evidence of his disregard for local customs and regulations. Furthermore, Detective Inspector Hayes continued, "Your video from this morning has already begun circulating on social media, despite our confiscation of your phone. It appears other tourists recorded your interaction and have posted it online." He turned a tablet toward Marcus, showing him his own humiliation replaying on various social media platforms. Marcus watched in horror as his confrontation with Guardsman Mitchell played out again and again, each time accompanied by comments that ranged from mockery to outright condemnation. The internet fame he had sought was indeed occurring, but as the subject of ridicule rather than admiration. Hashtags like disrespectful tourist and Royal Guard justice were trending, with his behavior being used as an example of everything wrong with modern social media culture. "This is going viral for all the wrong reasons," Marcus whispered, staring at the screen with growing despair. Comments from around the world criticized his behavior, with many people sharing their own experiences of visiting the palace respectfully and comparing his actions unfavorably to proper tourist etiquette. Detective Inspector Hayes nodded grimly. "Mr. Thompson, we're prepared to offer you a choice. You can face formal charges for harassment, disturbing the peace, and interfering with military personnel in the execution of their duties, which could result in significant fines and a criminal record that would affect your future travel. Alternatively, you can accept a community service arrangement and participate in an educational program about British military history and traditions." The offer came as a surprise to Marcus, who had expected only punishment rather than an opportunity for education. "What would the community service involve?" he asked cautiously. Sergeant Williams explained the alternative arrangement. "You would spend 40 hours working with veterans organizations in London, learning about military service and the sacrifices made by people like Guardsman Mitchell. You would also participate in a formal education program about Royal Guard traditions and write a public apology that acknowledges your behavior and demonstrates genuine understanding of why it was inappropriate." The prospect of spending his remaining vacation time in community service rather than sightseeing was disappointing, but Marcus recognized that it was far preferable to criminal charges and a permanent record. "And if I complete all of that successfully, there would be no criminal charges?" he asked. "Correct," Hayes confirmed. "However, you would also be banned from all royal properties for 5 years, and your behavior would be noted in immigration records. Any future incidents of this nature, either in the UK or reported from other countries, could result in travel restrictions." Marcus felt the weight of long-term consequences settling around him. The ban from royal properties meant he couldn't complete many of the tourist activities he had planned, and the immigration notation would follow him for years to come. Every future international trip would carry the shadow of this incident. "I'll take the community service option," Marcus said quietly. "I realize now that I made some serious mistakes, and I want to make things right." His voice carried genuine remorse, perhaps the first authentic emotion he had displayed since his arrest. As the paperwork was prepared, Marcus reflected on how drastically his situation had changed in just a few hours. The confident young man who had approached Guardsman Mitchell with a phone and a bag of trail mix had been replaced by someone facing the serious consequences of his thoughtless actions. The viral fame he had sought was indeed occurring, but as a cautionary tale rather than a celebration of cleverness. The officers began explaining the terms of his community service arrangement, including reporting schedules, educational requirements, and the process for writing his public apology. As Marcus listened to the details, he began to understand that his real education about respect, tradition, and personal responsibility was just beginning. Outside the security office, tourists continued to visit Buckingham Palace, taking respectful photographs and marveling at the ceremony with appropriate reverence. The guards continued their duties with the same professionalism and dedication they had shown for centuries, undisturbed by the latest incident of tourist misbehavior. For them, Marcus Thompson was simply another reminder of why their vigilance and standards could never be compromised. 6 weeks after his humiliating encounter at Buckingham Palace, Marcus stood in a veterans rehabilitation center in South London, helping elderly former soldiers with their physical therapy exercises. His 40 hours of community service had transformed from a punishment into an unexpected education about courage, sacrifice, and genuine service to others. The man who had once treated military personnel as entertainment props was now learning firsthand about the realities of military life and the lasting impact of service. "Marcus, could you help me with these weights?" asked Thomas Hartley, an 87-year-old veteran who had served in the Korean War. Thomas had been initially skeptical of the young American who had been assigned to their facility, especially after learning about the incident that brought him there. However, over the weeks, he had watched Marcus's attitude gradually transform from sullen obligation to genuine interest and respect. "Of course, Mr. Hartley," Marcus replied, moving quickly to assist with the exercise equipment. His approach was careful and respectful, a stark contrast to the brash confidence he had displayed at the palace. The stories he had heard from these veterans had given him a new understanding of what real courage looked like, and it had nothing to do with performing stunts for social media attention. During his educational program, Marcus had learned that Guardsman Mitchell, the soldier he had harassed, had been awarded the Military Cross for actions in Afghanistan, where he had risked his life to save wounded comrades. The ceremony Marcus had disrupted wasn't just pageantry. It was a living tribute to centuries of military tradition and current service, members who continued to put their lives on the line. His supervisor at the Veterans Center, Sarah Coleman, had noticed the change in Marcus's demeanor over the weeks. "You know, Marcus, when you first arrived here, I wasn't sure this program would work for you. You seemed more interested in completing your hours than actually learning anything, but I've watched you with the veterans and I can see you're genuinely connecting with them." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I've learned more in these 6 weeks than I did in years of creating social media content. These men and women have real stories worth telling. Stories about sacrifice and service that make my videos look incredibly shallow." His voice carried a maturity that hadn't been present during his palace encounter. The public apology Marcus had written as part of his sentence had also gone viral, but for very different reasons than his original video. Instead of seeking attention or making excuses, he had crafted a thoughtful explanation of his actions, his education about military service, and his commitment to treating veterans and active military personnel with appropriate respect. The apology had been praised for its sincerity and had actually helped rehabilitate his online reputation. "I want to read you something," Marcus told Thomas during one of their sessions. He pulled out his phone not to create content but to share something meaningful. "I've been writing about my experiences here not for social media, but just to process what I've learned. I wrote about your service in Korea and how different real bravery is from the fake courage I thought I was showing at the palace." Thomas listened as Marcus read his reflection, describing how the elderly veteran's stories of combat and brotherhood had taught him about genuine honor and sacrifice. The writing was thoughtful and humble, focusing on the lessons learned rather than seeking sympathy or attention for the author. As Marcus's community service neared completion, he faced a decision about his future. The incident at Buckingham Palace had cost him his job back in Chicago. His employer had terminated his contract after the video went viral and reflected poorly on their company. However, the experience had also opened his eyes to more meaningful ways to use his communication skills. Sarah Coleman approached him with an unexpected offer. "Marcus, we've been impressed with your work here and your genuine connection with our veterans. We're looking for someone to help document their stories and create educational content about military service. It would be paid work, but it's not about going viral or getting likes. It's about preserving important history and honoring service." The offer represented everything. Marcus had learned about the difference between meaningful content and mere entertainment. "I'd be honored to do that work," he replied. "These stories deserve to be told properly, with the respect and dignity they deserve." On his final day at the Veterans Center, Thomas Hartley presented Marcus with a small gift, a pin from his old regiment. "Son, I've seen a lot of young people over the years, and most never learn the lessons you've learned here. You made a mistake, but you've turned it into something worthwhile. That takes real character." Marcus accepted the pin with genuine gratitude, understanding that it represented something far more valuable than any viral video could ever provide. The elderly veteran's approval meant more to him than millions of social media views, because it was based on real transformation and earned respect, rather than momentary entertainment. 6 months later, Marcus returned to Buckingham Palace as a tourist, but this time his approach was entirely different. He stood at a respectful distance from the guards, observing the ceremony with the reverence it deserved. When other tourists around him began to exhibit inappropriate behavior, he quietly intervened, sharing what he had learned about the significance of the traditions they were witnessing. "Excuse me," he said politely to a group of teenagers who were planning to pose inappropriately near a guard. "I know it might seem like harmless fun, but those guards are active military personnel who've served in combat. The ceremony you're watching honors centuries of service and sacrifice. There are great photo opportunities that don't require disturbing them." The teenagers, initially annoyed by the interference, listened as Marcus briefly explained what he had learned about the guard's background and the importance of respectful behavior. His approach was gentle but informative, and the group ultimately chose to take their photos from an appropriate distance. Standing in the same courtyard where his life had dramatically changed, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him full circle. The viral fame he had once sought seemed meaningless, compared to the genuine connections he had made with veterans and the purposeful work he was now doing to honor their stories. His phone buzzed with a notification from his new project, a documentary series featuring veteran interviews that was gaining recognition for its thoughtful approach to military stories. The videos weren't designed to go viral, but they were making a real impact, educating viewers about service and sacrifice while treating the subjects with the dignity they deserved. As Marcus watched the changing of the guard ceremony, he noticed Guardsman Mitchell at his familiar post. The guard showed no sign of recognition, maintaining his professional composure as he had been trained to do. Marcus felt no desire to approach or interact. Instead, he felt a profound respect for the man's dedication and service. The lesson Marcus had learned extended far beyond appropriate tourist behavior. He had discovered the difference between seeking attention and earning respect, between entertainment and education, between viral moments and lasting impact. The young man who had once viewed uniformed personnel as props for his amusement had grown into someone who understood the real meaning of service and sacrifice. As he left the palace grounds that day, Marcus carried with him not just the memory of his mistakes, but the knowledge of how those mistakes had led to genuine growth and purpose. The consequences he had faced for his disrespectful behavior had ultimately become the foundation for a more meaningful life and career. The story of his transformation had indeed gone viral in its own way, shared not as entertainment but as an example of how accountability, education, and genuine remorse could lead to positive change. Marcus Thompson had learned that the most powerful stories weren't always the ones that generated the most views, but the ones that generated the most growth, respect, and understanding. His experience at Buckingham Palace had taught him that some institutions and traditions deserve reverence rather than ridicule, and that real courage lies not in seeking attention through outrageous behavior, but in serving others with honor, dignity, and respect. It was a lesson that would guide him for the rest of his life, transforming not just his career but his entire approach to human dignity and service to others.